Welcome to today's episode of the Indoencers Podcast. Our guest today is an extremely unique and skilled independent artist, as well as the lead singer for the fusion band, the Aditya Prakash Ensemble. His talents were spotted at the tender age of 16 when sitar legend Pandit Ravi Shankar invited him to be a part of his North America tour, where he performed in some of the world's biggest stages, including Carnegie Hall, the Hollywood Bowl, and Disney Concert Hall. Since then, he has produced multiple groundbreaking original albums, been featured on NPR's world-famous Tiny Desk concert series, and has continued collaborating with some of the world's most talented artists, including Tigran Hamasyan, Anushka Shankar, Salim Merchant, among many others. To discuss his musical journey till date, it is my honor to have Aditya Prakash on today's show. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Of course. Nice to talk to you and nice to be on this podcast.
So let's take it right back to the beginning and sort of trace your journey to where you are today. So starting from the beginning, I've read that, your childhood was surrounded by art ever since your earliest days, as your mother had a dance school. So in your earliest days, how much notice did you take of your surroundings?
I think it wasn't something I actually took notice of. It was just happening in the background and kind of subconsciously sitting somewhere in my musical consciousness. And my sister was kind of the opposite. She was very obviously interested in the arts. She's elder to me by 6 years and is a well-known Bharatanatyam dancer, Aditya Prakash. And so she learned vocal music, she learned mridangam, South Indian percussion, she learned Bharatanatyam, she learned veena, she learned flute. I feel like I'm missing stuff. She learned basically every single instrument that's possible. And she started all this when she was about 2 or 3, starting with dance and then adding on. My parents just kept enrolling her in more classes. But I was kind of like, I guess all the artistic attention was going to her, but I was kind of also there. I didn't show interest like her. When I was a kid, I was more interested in being naughty and playing pranks and playing with my toy cars. But around the age of like 4 or 5, I was like just naming ragas, as the singer who was singing for my mom's dance programs he was singing, and I was just playing with my cars and just like naming out the ragas, and they were like so shocked that I even knew this, right? There was just like a big shock for everyone. So then from that point, my parents took it like an interest in asking me what I wanted to learn. And I said mridangam first. I was more interested in the percussion side of things. And then shortly after, I actually learned Indian music on the harmonium, Carnatic music on the harmonium. And then I switched to keyboard. And then I started learning vocal. So yeah, I mean, it started from just being in that environment, and that was a very important thing for me, for my growth.
For example, 2 episodes ago, I interviewed another sort of somewhat similar artist to yourself, an artist named Apurva Krishna, who's a fusion artist based in the US as well. And she was talking about how when she was 3 or 4 years old, she had perfect pitch and she was able to play tunes on the piano just by ear. And, you're sort of sharing a similar story where you were able to name ragas at such a young age, despite not having the formal education. Do you think that comes down to a sort of a natural, like almost like God-given gift towards music, or is it some form of like subconscious training?
I don't think anything is, you can say anything can be learned or can be nurtured. So I don't think it's that we talk a lot about, especially in Indian music, oh, this is from like a God's gift that you have this. And yeah, some people have natural physical tendencies that are enhanced, and the music can come out in a special way with less effort. But other people have other skills that person might not have, and a lot of it is just your nurturing. And obviously, when you're young, you're a sponge. You really soak up so much. Like a lot of your predilections are kind of grown like seeds when you're very young. And so I think for me, I actually didn't. I feel like my sister was more of that type that was a very obviously talented person in the arts. I wasn't like that actually. I mean, I just heard the ragas because they would talk about it at home, or like my mom would say, "Oh, I'm doing Mohana Jatiswaram." I would hear all these raga names, and then I'd connect the tune that was sung with the raga, and it was just a matter of like just connecting the name to the sound. And I think anybody can do that, really, to be honest. So it's just about being in the right nurturing environment and being exposed to it from a young age.
Yeah, and you also brought up how you were learning various forms of Carnatic music as a child. You studied the mridangam, the harmonium, and switched to the Carnatic keyboard as well. How much do you think exposing yourself to Carnatic music through these different lenses impacted your sort of early musical education compared to, for example, if you just did Carnatic vocals or just did mridangam?
I mean, it's not like such a clear cut answer. I think because I'm involved in this process, I don't know. I can't say, oh yes, my rhythmic sense is better because I learned mridangam. It's all I've known, so I can't tell you. But I do think it does help to get an appreciation and to learn other instruments as well. It helps kind of build your awareness. Like if I wanna now compose a piece centered around vocal and mridangam, I'm familiar with the sound of mridangam. I'm familiar with what I would want from that composition because I'm familiar with that instrument. And whereas I'm less familiar with an instrument like a xylophone, I'm not less familiar with that. So I wouldn't know how to compose for that. But then again, you can learn by just listening, and anything can be learned by just listening and being an active listener, and also just speaking to other musicians who have trained in that style. So it just gives you another viewpoint to see music. It's not a necessity or something that drastically improves one thing.
Yeah, and you brought up listening, and I know listening to Carnatic music was a real big part of your childhood, and you'd be playing Semangudi Katsar's concerts as you slept and all that. And I've heard you call yourself a sort of Carnatic purist because you're so wedded to Carnatic music. And it's not uncommon for Carnatic teachers, at least from what I've seen, to recommend students not to get sort of distracted by other forms and to stick to Carnatic music. And so having been through like a childhood where you stuck to Carnatic music and really just listened to that, what do you think are the pros and cons of this approach? And is there any part of you that sort of wishes you explored a bit more, or are you grateful that you built yourself a solid foundation in something before you went out and explored?
I'm grateful that I built a solid foundation for sure, because that gives me my grounding, where I feel like my vision is clear because I'm seeing it from this deep foundation that's so rooted, and there's still so much more to keep building on this foundation. It's not just something that happened when I was young and when I was listening when I was young. I'm continuing to learn and still taking lessons from my gurus, and still listening to a lot. And that foundation has to keep building and building. But like, yeah, you can dig a bunch of holes, but if you want to get to the core and find that, like, the deepest part of the earth, you got to dig in one place over and over. That's what I feel I've done with Carnatic music, and I'm continuing to dig deeper into it. As for like the fusion aspect, like getting influence and being a purist, yeah, my ideas have changed over time. I think they're constantly changing, and a lot of it is the people I'm introduced to, the musicians I'm inspired by. And yeah, at one point I was so anti doing anything aside from Carnatic, or even listening to fusion or anything. I would only listen to like the Pakka traditionalist concerts. But even the idea of traditional or purist is so fluid, and it's so relative in the sense of Carnatic too, because Carnatic music 200 years ago is different from 100 years ago, and it's different from 50 years ago. And what we know of Carnatic music is actually very recent, from like the last 50 to 60 years. In the last century, the way we know Carnatic music is only defined by this century, actually. I mean, obviously it's influenced from the past as well, but it's not art form that has stayed static and is an ancient art form. It's continually evolving. And just like that, I'm also continually evolving as a person, as a musician. And when I went to college, my roommates were jazz musicians, and so naturally I was living with these people. I would hear them practice, they would hear me practice, and that interaction and that curiosity. And I grew up in Los Angeles, so I was already kind of exposed. I heard these sounds before, but now actually kind of understanding them more by actually conversing with my peers and my friends kind of sparked that interest and kind of switched on a little click. It clicked on a little switch in my head. It was like an aha moment to actually like see that there is such a similarity and such a difference, but there's a beautiful synergy between these two styles.
Yeah, and you mentioned how Carnatic music has continued to evolve, and in a lot of ways, Carnatic compositions sort of change over time. And sometimes the compositions that we sing today aren't necessarily sung in the way in which the composer intended it for it to be sung. Sometimes the meaning and the interpretations and the gumagums and all that change over time. So when you were learning Carnatic music, and I suppose, as you're learning now, how conscious are you of trying to stay, true to the intent of the original composition? And how much do you sort of let it evolve and sort of add your own interpretation to it?
Well, to be honest, we don't even really know the original intent, because we know a certain amount. Like, we can deduce certain things about the composition, but we do not know the exact original content, because those people aren't around, the original composers. We know from their students, and we know for their students. But the beautiful thing about Carnatic music is it's an oral tradition, and it allows for that evolution, and for each successive generation of musician to add their own spark, their own creativity, their own voice to the music. And in that sense, there's a lot of responsibility to the art form, because as a current generation, you're responsible for how the music is getting taken forward. And a lot of times it's been wrongly used, and we've gone way far from the original composition or the content that we kind of know. And there's certain texts that kind of give us a hint at what the composer's original framework was, like the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini and other texts that kind of outline some of these compositions. And when you see how far they've moved from that, you know that we have to kind of step back and reevaluate how much freedom we're allowed to have. And I think we have to kind of give respect to the original composition and follow that guideline. But within that, there's already so much scope that we don't need to modify so much and really veer away from the originals.
Yeah, and one thing that sort of makes me curious about a lot of the things we've sort of been discussing so far is, particularly with regards to how, interested you were in Carnatic music as a child, is, Carnatic music as an art form is really complex, and it can be really difficult to understand. And, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of understanding. And, when you're young, at least like, somebody like me, I was super impatient, and, I didn't take the time to try and understand this complex art form. So how do you think you were able to connect to something so deep when there were probably more accessible or easily accessible forms of music out there?
I think, it helps to have like a strong predilection towards it from childhood, or have the right kind of parental push to a point where it's not force, but it's like a little nudge. And I think that's what really connected me, is just starting at a young age, practicing the art form and kind of going into it with as a practitioner, not like learning about I wasn't interested in the history of it or the theory behind it. I just like singing, and I listen to these songs and I like them. I connect with the melodies, and that's how it started. But then obviously now, as I get deeper, I want to know more about the history of the art form. I think at first you want to just practice and actually feel the music, hear the music, sing the music, perform it. But then later we get more interested in knowing how this music came, who created this music, who owns this music, like what did this music come from? And all these kind of questions kind of play in your head, because people ask you and you don't have an answer, and I want to know. And Yeah, that's kind of what my search is now, is knowing more about where this came from and yeah, knowing more about it.
Yeah, as much as you were into Carnatic music, all of this was happening in Los Angeles, which isn't exactly the home of Carnatic music by any stretch of the imagination. And I know that, you sort of kept your Indian identity quite separate from your American life. So I'm wondering, did this ever lead to a sense of sort of isolation or loneliness where you felt you couldn't fundamentally relate with others, or was the music itself enough company for you?
Yeah, I definitely felt. I mean, I was one of very few Indian kids in all my schooling, from elementary to middle school to high school, and I was definitely the only kid that was studying Carnatic music, and I was serious about it. And I don't know. I think it's kind of you don't feel like being othered. You want to fit in, and I definitely felt this was very different. I didn't think anybody would understand it. Anybody would think it is normal. So I hid this side of my friends didn't even know that I was a serious music practitioner. They knew I learned Indian music. They didn't know that I was on tour. I was performing. I was doing concerts. It was just one after my tour with Ravi Shankar. I came back. I missed about 4 months of school, and my friends just knew I was on tour with some famous musician. And I came back, and I felt proud of my music after being with him, because the way he brought classical music to such a wide audience, and it was like a cool thing, like I was seeing. I usually at my Carnatic concerts when I go to India, I would just see people like me, like or mamas and mommies in the audience. And here with Ravi Ji, we're seeing like a diverse array of people coming to listen to his music, not just Indian people. And that kind of gave me a sort of boost. And then I came back, and I was like more excited to talk about Carnatic music with my friends, and it especially encouraged me that they were interested to know more. And at one point I was isolated. I felt I was scared of my differences, but then I guess over time you kind of accept your differences and you're proud of it, and it kind of defines who you are. And it's a special experience, kind of bringing kind of blending these two cultures, and it's unique. And I think there's something about that I enjoyed exploring, that kind of diverse background I came from, and I wanted to share more about that.
And throughout your Carnatic education, I know you're traveling to India as well to sort of delve deeper into the art. How much do you think being in India itself, being in that environment impacts your learning? What does it make a significant difference? Like
It
being in the country?
it makes a significant difference. It does. I think beyond just learning the music, the technicalities, and reproducing it correctly, you need to be around master musicians, and you need to be around your guru. You need to see the culture of the music is important. It's not isolated from the culture. Um, so I think going to India kind of, yeah, brought me to the culture of music, of Carnatic music. And that, I mean, it's not something that I can really show with a direct example, but it just plays into the music. And I think it's important to go to India, to actually study face to face with the teacher, and to interact with other musicians who are master musicians. You need to be around people that are above you so you can continually to aspire higher.
Yeah, so you were shuttling back and forth between US and India and learning. And then as you mentioned a few minutes ago, there was a key turning point for you, and that's when you got to perform and tour with the legendary sitar player Pandit Ravi Shankar. And an opportunity of this magnitude definitely doesn't pop out of nowhere.
Hmm.
So could you talk us through like how this came about?
Sure. When I was about 15 or 14, I was going to India regularly, but one year my parents just took me for 6 7 months. I missed like a whole chunk of school, and that was what was so great. My parents really gave an importance to studying this art form, and it was just or not just as important or more important than my education. So I came back. I'd been performing. I'd gotten a huge learning experience being in India for 8 months straight, 6 to 8 months, I think. And I think I started kind of establishing myself as like a concert singer at that age, for that age,
Mhm.
I was doing well, and I came back to California, and Ravi G lives in San Diego, which is not too far from Los Angeles. So he heard about his wife Sukanya auntie, heard about the family's known our family because the artistic community is quite closely knit. So they heard about me, and he's always looking for young talent, and so he was curious to hear me. There wasn't YouTube or Facebook at that point, so there was no clips of me online. So he asked me to come over to his house and prepare 30 minutes of music. He just wanted to hear me and come with a full set, violin, mridangam. And so I came, and I was very nervous, obviously. And when I came, it wasn't just him. It was like, and there's an audience in his house, a small audience, but nonetheless, I was really not expecting that. So it definitely put me off guard, caught me off guard. But right away, he eased my anxiety by being so like jovial, and he would show his appreciation, and he would talk in between the songs, so it didn't feel like a concert or anything. He would talk to me, ask me questions, tell me some of his favorite Carnatic ragas, and then after the half an hour was up, he kept requesting more songs and more ragas, and talking about his favorite Carnatic musicians, and it went to about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours of like a full on concert, and it was a really amazing experience that I'll always remember. And then shortly after that, life was normal. I was back at school, and I came back home, and my dad told me that Ravi G called while I was at school, and he was in Russia, and he asked if I'd be interested to tour with him on his Festival of India 3 tour for about 3 months. And yeah, that was the most critical part of my senior year in high school, when I'm applying for colleges, I'm taking SAT exams, and it's a very important time. But obviously, that this was too huge an opportunity to pass, and even my school understood. They let me kind of do my own schooling, my own self tutoring, as long as I came back and I was able to take like a test to make sure I was on par with the rest of my peers. Yeah, that's kind of how that connection started.
And all this sort of experience and the confidence that touring with him gave you allowed you to show your sort of singing self at school as well.
Hmm.
And I read that you ended up getting a lead role in your school's musical that year as well. And I'm sort of curious though, what wasn't it the very fact that you were into a different form of music that prevented you from showing your musical self at school? So how did delving deeper into Carnatic music give you the confidence to be in a musical and not have the fear of, an accidental briga or something coming out?
I mean, I was always scared of that. That could it was just a change in mindset, to be honest. It was just and also having the validation of someone like Ravi G was just a huge boost. Like that went a long way. To have the confidence and the belief in a master like him. I was a young kid. Like, there's no reason he needs to give me so much. Like, I was 15, 16. I mean, I'm just grateful for like the advice he gave me, for the confidence he instilled in me, and he said you need to take this up. You have a special talent, and you need to nurture this. You have to get very serious about it, and that itself gave me the confidence. Like, I didn't need to hide. I didn't need to. It was okay to be different at that point. I was on like touring with the one of the greatest legends of Indian music. Like, what am I shy about at this point? And then it was nice to also, I think, as kids grow up, they get a little bit more mature, and they don't make fun of you for your differences. Unfortunately, a lot of back when I was growing up, being different, you get made fun of a lot. So obviously, I want to avoid that as much as possible. So I hid anything Indian about myself. I tried to, which was very hard because I'm very deeply rooted in my Indian culture. So it felt like a weight lifted off once I was able to just be casual and just talk about Carnatic. I even did a lecture demonstration for my friends in high school about what Carnatic music was about, some of the technicalities, and yeah, I was really happy that people were interested and wanted to know more. So the words of a master, or the encouragement you get, is very important, and I'm very lucky that I had his guidance.
And it was his words that I believe sort of inspired you to take music more seriously and
Hmm.
consider it as a career.
Yeah.
And I mean, up to this point, you had been doing music quite seriously. You mentioned, you were in India for 6 to 8 months at like one stretch, just studying the music deeply. So was pursuing music as a career ever a consideration even before, all of the touring happened, or was it Panditji's words that really sort of flicked the switch there?
It was definitely his words, I think. I mean, I didn't really even think about my career before that. I loosely thought, yeah, sure, I could go into engineering or do something that what my father did. He was an engineer, and one of my tutors that was teaching me was really encouraging me into that side of things. And so I thought, yeah, why not? Like, my future wasn't something I actively thought about. But when Raviji told me that, like, I need to drop everything and focus solely on music and make that my life, that kind of gave me this kind of drive and this incentive. And I always had music was always there. It was, I mean, I never doubted that it would leave me at any point. But whether or not it was a career, it didn't really occur to me. And it obviously, that conversation wasn't like, oh, this is gonna be my profession. It just kind of solidified that. It kind of started off the journey, and as I gained more experience, it became more solidified that I wanted to do music.
And yeah, that journey started off at UCLA, at the University of California, Los Angeles, and you studied ethnomusicology, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, at UCLA.
Yeah.
So at this point, ethnomusicology is sort of the study of like music in under like various social contexts. And so to what extent was this form of study like an extension of what you'd already been studying from a musical perspective, and what was new, do you think?
There's a lot new at this point because, first of all, there wasn't any Carnatic music that was taught there. There was the only Indian music that was taught there was Hindustani music,
Mm.
and I did gain a lot and know a lot already because of my experience with Ravi Ji. But I did learn some compositions from Ustad Shudat Khan, and and I learned a lot of beautiful compositions from him, and I learned some interesting approaches to the ragas that I'd heard, but I didn't really actually know in the Hindustani repertoire. But what really it was a big learning experience for me because I was exposed to Western music theory, which I never learned before this. So I started learning notation. I was taking I was thrown into some jazz composition classes that were very tough for me because I never knew what jazz was really, and I was just thrown into composition classes with other jazz musicians, and it was just kind of learning on the fly. You just had to do it, and that was important. I mean, my first few compositions were actually, I think, only till the final project did I actually get a good grade on my compositions. Otherwise, I was struggling. And for my final project, my teacher was very happy. So I definitely grew by just being thrown into this world of jazz composition, and then of course learning about so many different styles like of music that I never heard of, like Kecek music, gamelan
Never
music.
heard of that either.
Yeah, it's a type of Indonesian style of music, and different styles of Arabic, Makam. Yeah, just music from all over the world I was exposed to, and I definitely wouldn't have gotten that anywhere else. So it was a really big eye opener for me.
How much of a challenge was it to view music laterally or vertically? Because Carnatic music, in it like fundamentally is very sort of horizontal. It's very melodic.
Yeah.
Like it's a single strand that extends a
Hmm.
very sort of long way. But once you get into like jazz, it's like multiple strands that like stack on top of each other.
Yeah.
So how much, what was it ever a struggle to sort of wrap your head around the concept of harmonies and all that?
It still is. Still is. Yeah. It's a different world. What I found is it's easier for me to interpret it in through my lens, which is through raga. So I kind of use my knowledge of the ragas, of the raga chaya, not saying the raga scale, because raga is much more than a scale, but some notes might not be in the actual structure of the raga, but they kind of can be built as a base for the chord, because they kind of are in the same feeling and they enhance the feeling as long as they're not sticking out too much. So I use the raga as my whatever raga my piece is in. I use that as the basis for harmony, because I can never think of harmony like a jazz musician. So there's no point in me even trying. I mean, I want to learn, but I want to take what I learn and interpret it through my lens, through my voice. So the learning is important. It's important to not do that before you actually sit with the style, talk to musicians, and kind of learn about it, and then you can find a way to digest it in your own way. Yeah, that's important, and I think my studies and my interaction with my friends and jazz musicians and bandmates helped me with that. But harmony is something that is very it goes over my head a lot. But to me, it's more about enhancing or creating a world, a soundscape with my music. I use harmony for that purpose.
Is a major chord still Sagapa, for example?
Yeah.
Or has it changed into CEG?
I mean, I always think of everything in swara. That's like my ABCD. It's my swaras are my alphabet. So I always think, but I can convert when needed. When you need to discuss, like when you need to speak another language to communicate with someone, it helps to know that second language. But for me, when I'm thinking in swaras. That's my language. But yeah.
Right. And you brought up your bandmates and the jazz musicians that you were living with at UCLA. And this is where your main band, the Aditya Prakash Ensemble, started up. And one thing that makes this band really special is that the members come from so many different musical backgrounds and cultures. But to start off with, how difficult was it to find that common meeting point or to find that common ground?
It started off really easy. It just happened in the spontaneity of improvisation. It just happened, and that's when we kind of like at a casual jam session. It just happened, and it was a magical moment. I can't. Maybe I'm romanticizing it in my head now as I look back, but it was a beautiful like aha satori moment where it just blended so nicely, and from then on it was difficult. Not difficult, but like to kind of converse and actually intellectualize and create something that isn't just spur of the moment, more thought out. It took some time to understand each other's styles, each other's vocabulary, and that just took some getting used to. And it's continuing to evolve. Yeah, it just started off with luck. Just yeah, that's really what it was.
Yeah, and throughout your time with the Aditya Prakash Ensemble, you've embarked on so many unique projects, and there's a couple that I want to touch on. And one of the most unique projects that I feel that you have embarked upon is Mara, a theatrical production you came up with primarily alongside your sister, Maithili Prakash, who's a Bharatanatyam dancer. And it's inspired, I've read, by the character Mara, who's a demon in Buddhism who tries to tempt Siddhartha away from enlightenment. But my question is, what significance did you feel that the story holds today, and what made you want to share the story in this form?
Well, I was practicing meditation, and I was interested in reading about philosophy, and yeah, I came across this character Mara in Buddha's life, and we were reading a book by Deepak Chopra, a fictional book, and this character Mara kept recurring in his life. But another philosophical approach talked about Mara as just the mind. It was all happening in Siddhartha's mind. Mara wasn't a demon, wasn't a character outside of him. And yeah, and it really made me think that the real demon is our own selves, our own mind, that keeps us from realizing the truth or realizing our real self. So we thought it would be interesting to explore that idea. Both of us were on a philosophical journey at that point, and we still are. But yeah, spirituality, meditation, are all things that played into our music, and this was a great experience, kind of turning it into a theatrical production. It was really fun and exciting.
How different was it scoring for a production compared to, just scoring music for your original album? Because I mean, you had created or produced your first album by this point as well. So
Mhm.
how much inspiration were you drawing from the forms of movement happening on stage?
It shifts a lot because you're not the center of attention at that point. You're like you have to react to something. You can't react to your own thoughts. You have to interact with others. You have to interact with dancers, and the narrative and the story of the dance is the most important. And everything you do has to serve that narrative, has to serve that story. It can't just be about the music all the time. And so, yeah, things change. Sometimes it something I might not like how it sounds, but it serves the narrative of the dance. It serves the narrative of the theatrical part of it. So that's important. It's less about the sound. It's more about the narrative, the story. And so your what you consider important changes when you're working in a music only setting and a dance setting or a theatrical setting. What becomes important changes. And so that gave me another shift, another point of view.
And generally, theatrical productions or like musicals in general, it would be centered around like acting or dialogue, I would say. And then the art would sort of be the background. So you might have like background music or something like that. But in this case, at least from what I read, the art was the main. You were basically speaking through music, speaking through dance. So with the art at the forefront, how do you go about conveying the message that needed to be conveyed without having direct forms of messaging like dialogue?
I mean, we did have text to kind of drive viewers in the right direction,
Mm.
but we didn't spell it out, and that's always a challenge and the beauty of art. There's a gray area. People can take what they want from it. They're not told what to think. That's something that, yeah, it's a very special quality about art. And when you're not told something and you discover it on your own, it really hits deeper actually. So I think that's the power of art, and so that's what we try to do. I mean, we obviously want people to understand the story and the plot and the narrative, but we didn't spell it out per se. There weren't there but there were dialogues that happened that kind of pointed people in the right direction.
Yeah, and something you mentioned there is something I've heard from musicians. For example, like one of my favorite musicians right now is somebody called Jacob Collier, who I'm
Yeah, of
pretty sure
course.
you're familiar with. And he talks about how in his compositions he tries to leave space for audience interpretation and essentially not sort of fill it with so much meaning that a meaning is forced on the listener, but
Mhm.
rather sort of keep it more open and allow the listener to come up with their own interpretation based on their own sort of personal influences. Is that something you consciously think about with your own compositions?
It's something I definitely I haven't before, but it's something I'm starting to think about now. Yeah, is to like leave a little bit of ambiguity because you don't want to force your thoughts on other people. You want to let them digest it in a way that they can. You want to give space for that, and I think that's important. And that's something I'm continually to learn and continuing to evolve and work on as a musician.
In a sort of world where listeners have so much, not only so much music to listen to, but just everything so fast paced because of technology in general, do you think listeners have the patience to sort of sit on a song and really dig deep and find their own interpretation, or is it up to the artist to make sure that the listeners are able to do that and to cultivate a sort of environment where listeners can really dig deep into something through the creation of songs where you can find your own meaning?
I would like to think that that would be the case, that we don't have to spoon feed everyone, because that would not lead to healthy listening environment. And when because the listeners they have to be active listeners. It's not music can be entertainment. It can just be a form of entertainment, but it can also be a serious form of engagement as well. And so I do think nowadays with our we're digitally distracted all the time, and our just attention span is decreasing now to 2 minute songs, 1 minute songs, 30-second songs, 15-second Instagram stories. Like everything is just coming into pill-sized form, and it doesn't allow for much scope for development. It's more about getting right into it and getting to the point, which is also a very tough skill to have. And it's what really makes musicians survive now, if you can really do that. And I think there's a beauty in having the space and allowing a 15-minute piece to really build and develop and blossom versus a 2 minute in your face, boom, I got to right to the point. It's a challenge that I don't have an answer for. It's constantly evolving. Our audience is evolving, and our technology is really changing the way we listen and experience and make music. So we'll have to see how it goes. But I would like to think that the audience is an important and engaged part of the music experience, and they should have their own room to interpret and experience the music.
I've read, some of your interviews where you say that your music is not meant for the mainstream, and this sort of ties into the conversation we've been having for the past few minutes. Where music is getting shorter, and is being created in a way in which it caters to the sort of general societal impatience. But is that a sort of reality that you've embraced and accepted, or do you think there is scope in the future for the sort of music you make to really be mainstream?
I'm not even, to be honest, I'm not even thinking about these things. Mainstream isn't something I aspire for. It's not something, if it happens, that's great, but it's not informing my musical choices or my musical decisions. I'm just mostly inspired by bringing out and sharing this unique art form, Carnatic music, which I love so much, and sharing it in a way that's me, my voice. And yeah, I just want to share. And if people want to listen, that's great. And I would love that. I would love for people to have an open mind and open ears and listen. Whether it's mainstream or not, I don't know, and I can't predict, and it's not something I spend my time analyzing or thinking about, to be honest.
Yeah, so we've sort of spent the past few minutes talking about your sort of approach to composition, and I want to sort of lead that into talk about your latest album, which is Diaspora Kid, and an album that really, really did fascinate me, and one that I really, really enjoyed. And this isn't the first fusion album that you have composed, and your previous work also, at least loosely, seems to be centered around the confluence of genres and cultures. So, what inspired this specific album?
This specific album, a lot of the songs were, it was very different from my first album, which was more just about my initial, it centered around the raga, and everything else kind of worked around that. This one, I was more interested in exploring my voice through exploring the jazz side of things through my Carnatic voice. And I was getting more interested in harmony and how I would solo over chord changes, and so I was approaching, I was kind of stepping into another world through the lens of the Indian classical, where it's usually the other way. You bring in the Western ear to the Indian world. It was the Indian world coming into the Western world and exploring it through that voice. Yeah, I mean, I was soloing over chord changes. It was something. It was a new experience for me, and I was really fascinated by that. At that point, that's kind of what the album was about, like exploring different cultures or different sounds through my voice. And one song was inspired from my love for Radiohead and Tool and rock music. Another song was inspired from my love for hip hop. And yeah, I mean, these are all things styles that I grew up hearing, and had friends who were great musicians in these styles, and it played an influence on me. So that was what Diaspora Kid was about, is about the diversity of being from the diaspora, but always staying rooted to that central Indian classical voice that I came from.
Right, right. And yeah, you mentioned how this album really brings out the talents of so many different artists from different musical cultures as well. And this album features not only your talents, but the talents of 24 other musicians who play different instruments and come from different musical backgrounds. So particularly in an album like this, where you have so many different people sort of adding their own creative input into your album, how do you effectively bring out the creativity of each musician while maintaining your own vision for the composition? Is it just as simple as giving sheet music and chord charts and making sure that everyone's on the same time signatures, or is there more to it?
I think in the beginning stage, it's about spending time with the musicians and really understanding each other. It's not about sheet music, that won't work. For something like this, it's not just playing jazz standards, it's about knowing each other's style and knowing each other's approach. And we did that in college. And so now we've gotten that foundation set between us. So now we can use sheet music. We can meet for a few rehearsals and kind of have a strong grounding because we understand each other. So the headway we made in college allows us the ease of just kind of meeting for a few rehearsals before and getting the music down. But that being said, it was important to have these dialogues and kind of spend time with each other in the beginning stages of this collaboration. But for this album, obviously, everyone's busy, and so I don't need to worry about bringing out their voice. They're master musicians, and they'll bring out their voice when they play, and they'll say true. They'll say true to themselves, and they'll serve the purpose of the music, and they won't play anything that's not meant to be played. Something that sticks out like a sore thumb. They know the form, the style. They know me. We know each other. So that relationship is important. So everyone's busy. So yeah, I had to write out sheet music, and we had just a couple of rehearsals. Some of the songs we played in concert many times, so they're kind of more marinated and they settled with us a little bit more. But some songs were very new, and we only had a couple of rehearsals, and that's how it was done.
Yeah, and this album in general features, so many songs from so many different genres. And it almost feels like it intentionally touches upon each genre of music that you were exposed to growing up, whether it's, Carnatic jazz, a Radiohead-esque internet experimental sort of sound, hip hop, or Irish music, whatever else. But how much of this was intentional in a way that, like, you sort of tick these genres off a checklist, and how much of it was a sort of natural manifestation of your own musical influences?
It was all just natural manifestation. It wasn't about a checklist. Like, who would have thought Irish? Like, I mean, I didn't compose it trying to create an Irish tune. I just thought of this melody, and to me, it sounded familiar to like an Irish fiddle tune that I would have heard at some point. And so I think it was just a natural manifestation of all these sounds I grew up with.
And yeah, because you experimented, with so many different genres, it did take you out of your comfort zone. And you put out a video where you're talking about in one of your songs, Joy, where you experimented with shifting the tonic mid
Hmm.
song, which is something we don't really see in Carnatic apart from maybe with like Rahabedam. But
Yeah,
in general, throughout this album, in what ways do you think you really stepped out of your comfort zone?
that was one way, and another way was yeah, like soloing over chord changes and singing in English. Those are the two main ones, and they were huge for me because at the core of Carnatic music is singing in Indian language and singing with a tonic. So those are huge things that kind of shifted off that comfort zone.
Yeah, so that was Diaspora Kid, your last album. And as we sort of look ahead to your future, I've seen that you're working with a musician that I personally really, really admire, and that's Armenian pianist Tigran Hamasyan.
Mhm.
So, how did you get to know him, and what can we expect from your album with him?
Well, things have changed. We're just working on a single right now. He's
Oh,
obviously been very busy, and COVID has kind of put a huge change in everyone's plans. But I met him through my experiences with Akram Khan. He was I was introduced to him through Akram Khan, and I just expressed how interested I would be to work together, and I sent him a lot of my stuff, and yeah, he was very kind, and he listened, and he was kind enough to mentor me. And so I started showing him some of my compositions for my forthcoming album, or I don't know what it's going to be. I'm just working on new music, but he gave me advice, and I learned a lot from him. Whatever few sessions I was able to have, I'm very grateful, and it's really taught me a lot, and it's going to inform how my music moves forward. And I'm continuing to learn more, but yeah, I hope I can still be in touch with him and continue to make more music.
Yeah, and before a few weeks ago when I reached out to you for this podcast, you said you were recording something for an upcoming project. Is there anything you can possibly tell us about that project or any other projects that you might be working on?
Yeah, so that one is I was commissioned to co-compose with my friend Sushma Soma, who is a wonderful vocalist from Singapore. She's doing a project about man's relationship to nature and sustainability and environmentalism, and yeah, she's very passionate about these issues, and I've learned a lot about those issues from her, and yeah, I just kind of helped her bring her vision to life, and we were working on creating the material for that. She came to visit me from Singapore so we can work on it because the virtual thing was getting very difficult on Zoom. So it's important to be face to face sometimes, and so we came and we got a lot of work done. So I was quite busy with that, and I'm working on my own album just about my experiences during lockdown, the tension, the isolation, the violence that kind of really it continues to just become. It's always been there, but the violence in speech, the violence in action, yeah, and seeing that has kind of the tension of this whole and the unpredictability of this whole time has really influenced the way I'm composing and thinking about music. So that we'll have to wait to find out and see how it goes.
But when you speak about the sort of violence that you're seeing, is that do you think that's something that's always been there and it's just sort of coming out more to the fore now? Or do you think there's something additional that's instigated a sort
I
of new level of negativity?
I do think a lot of it is it's there, but when certain people of power kind of legitimize it and make it okay for that kind of hate speech or that kind of way of acting, when they make it okay or acceptable and justify it, it comes to the forefront, and that's what's happened over these last 4 years, and it's really boiled over. I mean, I'm sure it's happened. It's been happening much before this. It's just for me. It's more apparent. I don't have any distractions. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not touring. I'm not. I'm here. I'm stuck in LA. I'm seeing everything happen, and I don't have any distractions. And these issues are they become right in your face, and it's an ugly truth that you've been able to hide from for only so long. So it's come out during this period for sure.
So yeah, putting the negativity to one side and looking towards the other side of this the brighter side of the spectrum, obviously you're an incredible vocalist, and I think the listeners might get a little upset with me if I don't have you sing, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, like just anything, something.
If you don't mind, I have a request. One of my favorite songs of yours, I mean, it's not your original composition, but it's Nadia.
Oh,
I've been a massive fan of the song ever since.
of course,
The
yeah.
first version I heard was Shankar Taka's, and I heard like Nitin Sawhney and obviously yours as well. And yeah, I love that song. So
I'll sing one line from that. Hmm. नदिया नदिया भरे भई रे नदिया भरे भई रे नदिया भर 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 भई नदिया भर भई
That was incredible. Thank you so much. So I know you're running out of time, but we generally end the podcast with one last question. And it's the same final ending question for every guest that comes on. And so I'm going to throw it to you as well. And that question is, what's on your playlist right now?
Oh, you know, in the last, it's been such a random, I don't even have a playlist. I just randomly listen to things. I've been listening to Steve Reich, Terry Riley, Tool. They're constant on my playlist. Tigran, another constant. Ramnath Krishnan, T. Brinda. Yeah, I mean, that's all that comes to my mind right now at this moment.
All right, I think we'll finish the podcast off there. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to all of the listeners that have been tuning in. And make sure to go and check out Aditya's music and his social media in the description below. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, that was Aditya Prakash on the 10th episode of the Indoencers Podcast. And thank you to everyone that has tuned in. You can find us at the Indoencers, spelled THEINDOENCERS, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or you can use the links in the description. Likewise, you can find our homepage at theindoencers.wordpress.com or through the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the Indoencers Podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time.